In 2022, everyone wanted a Miyoo Mini. The problem was Miyoo couldn't keep up with the demand, so the door was wide open for Anbernic to come in with a new small form factor handheld. At launch, the 35XX was unimpressive. The build was solid as it usually is with Anbernic, but the software was bare bones and clunky. Luckily, in a matter of weeks, we had a new custom operating system called GarlicOS that took the 35XX from dead on arrival to community favorite in what felt like overnight. We then got the Miyoo Mini Plus. Offering the same size screen as the 35XX with the full Onion OS support and Wi-Fi, it quickly became the go-to for everyone looking for a pocket-friendly handheld. Fast forward a few months, and now Anbernic has a refresh called the 35XX Plus. But is the upgrade worth it if you already have a 35XX or even a Miyoo Mini Plus? Let's find out. First, as usual, we have to talk about the price and the specs. The 35XX Plus retails for $63.99 plus shipping and is available in 3 colors: clear black, white, and gray. It runs on Linux, has an all-winner H700 quad-core ARM Cortex-A53 CPU clocked in at 1.5 GHz, so it should outperform the RK3326 devices. For the GPU, we have a dual-core G31 MP2, 1GB of LPDDR4 RAM. For storage, it comes with a 64GB microSD card with dual SD card support. The screen is a 3.5-inch 640x480 IPS, the battery is 3300 mAh, and they're claiming about 8 hours, but that's really going to depend on how hard you push it. These estimations are always optimistic, but I've noticed around 6 hours playing a mix of games on and off. Like I've said before, battery life can be all over the place on these handhelds. It also has C2C charging, and it supports Wi-Fi 2.4, 5G, and Bluetooth 4.2. Unfortunately, the Bluetooth doesn't support audio as of now, so it's just for controllers. True to its name, the Plus is an improvement across the board from its predecessor, but specs are just one side of it, and we still need to look at how it all comes together for a user experience and gameplay, so let's take a look at the rest of the device. Now let's take a look at the hardware, and at first glance, not all that has changed from the original 35XX, but once you get a little closer, you can see that the position and angle of the start, select, and menu buttons was moved a little. I'm really not sure what the point of this was, since it doesn't really make a difference for ergonomics, and if you have a custom shell of your original 35XX, you're not going to be able to use it in this new revision. Another change is the D-pad. It's slightly more rounded and feels tighter. I haven't noticed any of the accidental inputs that were an issue with the original, but that's always going to be a factor when you're using a rubber membrane D-pad simply because of how they function. That being said, I haven't really had any issues in my day-to-day play, and I think the D-pad was improved from what we had in the original. The buttons also feel tighter than the originals, but they're just as quiet. They definitely feel different on the top, a little bit more rounded, but that's not a good or a bad thing, it's just a difference that I've noticed. They also feel a lot more responsive when you press them, but they still seem to be the exact same size, so if you have custom buttons, this should still work. Start, select, and menu have that same rubber membrane feel. Like I said, this change in position is a little bit weird, but it's not a bad thing. We're still not sure if Anbernic's using the same screen, but it looks like the bezels are slightly smaller in the new model. The brightness and color is also slightly different, but that could be due to the new software. New screen or not, for the most part games look great, and while it's only a 3.5-inch screen, the overall size of the device makes it feel like it's a larger display. As far as the sides, everything stayed about the same. On the left side we have our volume rocker. On the bottom we have our USB Type-C port, our headphone jack, and on the right side we have our 2 SD card slots, a reset button, and a power button. On the top, we have our mini HDMI out, and we also have our LED indicators. On the back, we have some of the more visible changes. The back buttons have been changed to resemble more of the better back buttons that were available for the 35XX, and while I think those are a little bit better, I don't feel like a mod is necessary with these. It's nice to see Anbernic improve on the design they introduced with the 353V. A new addition is a battery cover that can be removed by taking off a Phillips head screwdriver. It's nice to see that we have easy access to the battery now and that we don't have to take the whole thing apart. I don't really think you're going to have to open this up a whole lot, but if we do have, let's say, a battery upgrade or your battery goes bad for some reason, it is nice that you don't have to take everything off just to be able to get into this one. Some of the small changes like the new position to the start and select buttons are strange choices, but the change to the back buttons and the new battery cover are a very nice addition. The original 35XX was already a solid handheld, so it's nice to see the formula get improved. Currently, we have 3 options for custom firmware in development: GarlicOS, Batocera Lite, and MustardOS. Unfortunately, these are still being worked on, and while you can get games working on them, the experience just isn't there yet. But let's still take a look at the current state of them and see where we're at. Garlic is functional but missing some features. It still needs to integrate an on-screen keyboard to enable the Wi-Fi, the Bluetooth currently isn't working, and it still needs to add higher-end emulators amongst some other things. Batocera is also missing some key features like brightness control, HDMI output, SD card expansion, support for more cores, and a few others. But this will probably be the most feature-rich option when it comes out, so I'm excited to see how it turns out. And finally, MustardOS. It uses RetroArch to create a simple interface. This is great for a lot of users, but you do miss out on standalone emulators, and you have to be comfortable with RetroArch. Unfortunately, it's also missing features like Bluetooth, sleep mode, controller support, and HDMI out. I'm very comfortable with RetroArch, so this is one I'm definitely going to keep my eye on. As you can see, these are still being developed. It's great to see the community come together and make something better, and I know before long these are going to be the better option for everyday use, but we're just not there yet, so be patient. For now, the stock OS is definitely the way to go. The stock OS isn't bad, but it's not as good as what we've seen from custom firmware. To Anbernic's credit, they've done 2 updates as of the time of this review. Unfortunately, they haven't made it easy to get them. Instead of doing the update over Wi-Fi, you have to download it from a Google Drive linked on their last update video. You have to then flash it onto an SD card. To make things worse, the update is 60 GB because they didn't remove the games. The image is broken up into 5 zip files that you have to extract together. The problem is, some of those files have a 00 and an upper extension that you have to delete or the extraction won't work. I can't link you to that because of the ROMs that come with it, but it's not hard to find. Clearly this is an issue and I hope they fix because as of right now the process is convoluted and the file size is ridiculous. And when they do, I'll go ahead and link it in this video. All that being said, let's take a look at the stock experience. The menu looks about the same as it did on the original 35XX with the addition of RetroArch and some connectivity settings. You have Game Room, RetroArch, Favorites, History, Search, and Settings. In Settings, you'll find the majority of the configuration options like date and time, language, RetroArch, networks, icons, etc. The RetroArch option is where you'll access RetroArch settings. You're going to want to go in here and turn on Retro Achievements because for some reason, Anbernic has them disabled out of the box. To do that, launch RetroArch, then go to Settings, User Interface, Menu Item Visibility, Settings, and scroll down to Show Achievements. After that, head back to Settings, turn on Achievements, and log in. If you change something you didn't want, you can also reset configurations with a simple button press from the RetroArch settings on the main menu. You can also test inputs of the settings menu, so let's take a look at the D-pad while we're here. As you can see, I'm getting movement all the way around, but if I hold it down and I wiggle it a little bit, I'm not getting any accidental inputs. If I go a little bit harder, I can hit those diagonals without any problems. And even if I start changing direction rapidly back and forth, you'll see that I'm not getting any inputs that I'm not intending to have. So like I was saying earlier, it looks like Anbernic fixed the D-pad's issue, so you're not really going to have to open this one up and do any type of tape mod or nothing like that. In Game Room, you'll find your standalone emulators. If you're using a second SD card, the system will ask you every time where you want your games to be read from. Once you select the storage option, you'll see a list of emulators. They have a few options like save states, display options, disc selection for multi-disc games, but they're pretty limited. PPSSPP is the exception here since you have access to all the options the emulator has to offer. Unfortunately, at the time of this review, I haven't been able to get RetroArch achievements working. The option is there, but the system doesn't have an on-screen keyboard. I tried plugging one in to type my credentials, but even then I couldn't get the system to recognize it. So for now, Retro Achievements are only available on RetroArch. Moving on to RetroArch, the layout is different. You have icons for each system, and if you select SD1 as the storage option, you'll see an icon for apps. Here you have a few options. Arcade Core, I really don't notice a difference when I toggle this. Bezels, turns on bezels for the cores that support them. Night Mode, turns on a dark shader, it's very useful when you're playing at night. Quick Shutdown, removes the shutdown animation when powering down. Shaders, turns on shaders, and Vertical Rotation is pretty self-explanatory, it rotates the screen for vertical arcade games. Back to the system selection, once you pick one, you can scroll the list of games by pressing up and down or jump to the next letter by pressing left or right. Also, if the system supports it, you can select what core you want to use by pressing Y. Once you're in a game, the hotkeys are the same as most Linux devices. M plus L1 is save state, M plus R1 load state, M plus R2 fast forward, M plus L2 slow down, M plus Y show FPS, M plus X is pause, M plus B is screenshot, and M plus the D-pad left and right changes the save slot, M plus start closes the game. Strangely, the standalone emulator for DS is listed under RetroArch, but it uses Drastic. The core for Melon DS is available, but the performance is so bad it's unplayable. The hotkeys for DS are different. L2 and R2 change the screens, pressing the power button changes the D-pad to status control, with A being the input button. The menu buttons opens up the Drastic menu, and from here you can use save states or change the button mappings. I would advise not changing a lot from here since it's easy to mess things up, and if you do, you'll have to use a keyboard to reset all the button bindings. And that's about it for the software segment. I think the stock OS is decent. The problem is the updates haven't been handled well. It currently has the most features and is more than fine for day-to-day use until we get a better option. Or for more casual users that don't want to bother with a bunch of settings or having to install custom firmware. The original 35XX could already handle most games from the PS1 on down, and in my opinion, that's still where this handheld is going to shine. The lower end systems run smooth and look great on a 4x3 screen with minimal compromises. Plus, you usually don't need workarounds for the lack of analog sticks. But because of the power boost, we now have access to some higher end systems like Dreamcast and PSP, so we have to talk about those. Starting with the DS. The actual performance of DS games is solid, but the screen size and lack of a touchscreen really limits the amount of games you can actually play. If you focus more on turn-based games like Pokemon and Dragon Quest, then you won't have any issues. Or games that either don't need a touchscreen or have patches like Mario Kart or Castlevania DS. N64 is hit or miss since we can only use RetroArch. You have to play at a low resolution, and even then you'll see slowdown. You really have to adjust the settings to get the most out of it, and even then you won't see harder to run games like Conquer running at a playable frame rate. Now, if you're okay with low resolution and not having an analog stick, games like Super Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time run fine. You can hold on R2 so that the face buttons act like N64 C buttons, and for the most part the D-pad works fine for movement. I'm sure performance will improve with custom firmware or even with a standalone emulator, but as of right now, N64 performance isn't great. Now if things change, this could be a great option for playing N64 games on a TV. Dreamcast has most of the same issues as the N64 as far as the lack of analog sticks and having to run games at a lower resolution, but performance is actually better. You do have to run games with an auto frame skip, but that's not something that really hurts the gameplay. A lot of games work with the D-pad right away, but the ones that don't can be an issue. Every time I would try to remap my D-pad to work as an analog stick, the bindings would get deleted after I saved an overwrite. This made playing games that don't work with the D-pad very frustrating to play, and I'm sure this is a system that's going to see a lot of improvement once we get custom firmware. PSP surprised me because I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. Don't get me wrong, this still isn't an ideal fit for PSP because of the screen size and the lack of a stick, but a lot of PSP games just use a D-pad. And for the ones that don't, you can just press R2 or the power button depending on what version of the OS you're on to switch the D-pad to act like a stick. Also, because this is a vertical handheld, the smaller screen didn't bother me as much. It just feels like I have less dead space. Since we actually have access to PPSSPP, performance on PSP is actually better than both Dreamcast and N64. You're still not going to play the most demanding PSP games like God of War or Tekken 6, but if you want to play some more wholesome games like, let's say, Doki Doki Literature Club, Persona 3 Portable, or RPGs like Ys 7, you're gonna have a good time. Of course, it can handle more intensive games, but the more you push it, the more tinkering you'll have to do. All of these new systems need to be considered bonuses. Like I said, the lower end systems is where you'll really see it shine, since these new systems all come with compromises. Until we have custom firmware, we won't really know how far we can push it, but keep in mind this is a $64 handheld that can still play a good amount of PSP, DS, and Dreamcast, while being about the size of a wallet. I hope this review doesn't come across as negative. It's just the 35XX Plus is in an interesting position right now. It's more powerful and has more features than both the original 35XX and the Miyoo Mini Plus, but the software is still not as good as those two. I can't completely recommend it at this time since both the 35XX and the Miyoo Mini Plus have mature custom firmware, but like I said, work's already being done on that, and in the very near future the Plus is going to get a lot better. So we have to keep that in mind. If you want something that's ready to go day one, go with the 35XX or the Miyoo Mini Plus. But if you want something in that same price range that's going to offer more, it's hard not to consider the Plus. I can't fully recommend things based on what could be. I'll have to revisit this one in a few weeks to see where we're at, but if it was me and I could only have one headphone in this category, I would probably pick the Plus. Things in this hobby move fast and the potential is higher than the other two. More power, Wi-Fi, HDMI out, a bigger battery, and Bluetooth at this size and price is a tempting proposition. Well, that's going to wrap it up. I hope this video was informative and that you enjoyed it. There's 3 of us on the channel, so every video is a little bit different, but we do our best to bring you quality content. If you want to hang out with us, you can always find us on Discord, and we go live on here all the time. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. It really helps the channel grow, and it helps us bring you more videos like this. Thanks for hanging out. I'll see you on the next one.